Okay, I'm Karen Templeton, and I am just going to show you and talk about some simply simple tips that over the years I have learned and have really helped in my quilt making, especially in my accuracy. And over time I've realized that not everybody knows a lot of these tips, so if you do, just do something else, and if you don't, listen on. The first thing we're going to do is talk about squaring up a block, because more and more, especially on blocks such as this one, this is from my Scrap Tees quilt that I'm working on, more and more you'll run into patterns that have you cut a little bigger and then trim the block down to what it needs to be. This is the case on this. It needs to be a finished 10-inch, which means unfinished 10.5, and you can see, it's got a lot of wild little edges. So, in theory, what we did as kids, which was take a square piece of paper and fold it, and that gave us the center. But that doesn't always work on a block. But you want to keep the integrity of the design, especially because you're putting this together with another block and another block and another block. So the first thing that I do is I say, okay, I need to trim this to 10.5 inches because it's gonna be a finished 10-inch. So starting with the 10.5 inches, I divide that in half, which is 5 1/4. So these rulers we have today are really, really exceptional. The first thing I do is use the blue tape, and I mark my 10.5 inches. The inside of this is my 10.5 inches. So then it's simply a matter of finding my 5 1/4, which is half of that, in the very center. And I don't have a seam in the center. I have a white square. But I do have points of that square. So that's basically what I'm going to use. And I'm going to try. There, that makes it look better. Here is my 5 1/4 line, and here. So right there, that point needs to be my center. So I need to come down this way, and I want to have a point. First off, I want to make sure that I've got enough down here to make 10.5, which I don't. So I'm going to have to come up a little bit. It's kind of like just keep wiggling and wiggling till you get it. And I wish there was a more scientific way to do it. And with some blocks, a simple block it is. But some of these that have a lot more pieces, it's not. But basically, here's my 5 1/4 line. And I'm coming across, and I should have brought a pointer. Here, I'll use my scissor point. So here is my 5 1/4 point. So theoretically, I want that right in the center, or as close to the center as I can get. Okay? Wait a minute. Right here. So I need to come down some. And what I'm looking at are these points, because I want to make sure this line coming across here is still straight. Okay? Right here, this is at the 5 1/4, that intersection right there. Okay? This one is not quite there, so I'm going to try to keep this 5 1/4 there and scoot this up just a little bit. Okay, now it's on that 5 1/4 line. Now I'm talking about this horizontal line going across here, 5 1/4, and it's still 5 1/4 here. Okay, we've got that. Now we need to come down through the middle. And actually, I'm looking at, sorry about that. I'm looking right here is my 5 1/4. And again, this is the section where this blue, the corner, and that's right at 5 1/4. So I want to come down here now, and keeping all three of these other corners, I want to get this one. So again, it's kind of a matter of making it work. And now I have got this point here at the 5 1/4 line. And this one is still at the 5 1/4 line. This one is slipped a little bit, so we're going to move it just a wee bit. And then we are not going to breathe until we cut this, okay? Literally, we are going to hold it in the center and trim the two sides. Oops. We've got this soft pressing cloth under it, and I think I have a dull rotary. Now, it helps if you can do this ambidextrous, which is one thing I have kind of taught myself to do over the years. Okay, so we got these two sides, and we're saying those are ours. So then you simply rotate around. You put this at your 10 1/2 because this is your cut line. You put this along the top at your 10 1/2. And I'm sorry, I'm going to have to sit up, Pam, or stand up. There we go. And again, now there's no going back now. You just have to, because you've already cut these two. And then you trim that side. And you trim this side. And now you have your nicely trimmed, almost perfect 10 1/2 inch block that will sew. If you look at the seams, and that's one way some people do it, I'm going to pretty much hit these intersections when I sew this block to the next one. So I've done pretty good. Okay, so that is trimming up a block, and from there we're going to go on to a little pressing technique that everybody should be doing, and I hope that most of you are, and I'm just talking into the wind, but so many times people make these little half square triangles and they just seem perfect, and they make 100 of them, and then oops, well, this one doesn't fit, well, this one doesn't fit, well, most of the time it's because you've stretched it. Now, being sewn on the bias, there's a given amount of stretch anyway. Oh, I should do it with the colored side through here. So the one thing you absolutely don't want to do, ever, 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 is when you're pressing these open, you do not want to press them. I mean, your initial press, of course, always is along the seam line, always. But then once you open this up, okay? Too many times I see people do this. And what you should be doing is this. You press across that line. That way you are not doing any additional stretching beyond what you might already, have. And it works real well to just kind of do it like that. Let the point of your iron, kind of help you. But do it across the seam line, not down the seam line. So, another thing that, and this is, I guess, personal preference, but it's worked very well for me over the years, and this is a tip about ironing that a longtime friend who has done some marvelous quilting passed on to me, and that was, don't steam. Don't steam at this point. At this point, you can steam. You've got all your components put together. But the steam will also add to stretching. And a lot of people use a lot of heavy steam, and that makes it even worse. So I always use a dry iron until I have my whole block put together. And oftentimes, I don't even use steam until I'm pressing it just before quilting, after I've got the borders on and everything totally done. Because again, the steam, if you're not extremely careful, and maybe I'm just not, but you're going to get some extra stretching just from the steam. So another point that I always do, something my mother, who was an excellent seamstress years ago, taught me when I started at the machine about 4 years of age, is you always start with your needle down. In other words, when you put that fabric up to the machine, you lay it where you want it, and if you have a button for needle down, or if you just have the turn wheel, put that needle where you want it, right at the 1/4 inch, or if you're sewing clothes, 5/8, whatever. Put that needle in before you've ever dropped the presser foot. That keeps that fabric there. The presser foot won't automatically keep it, and a lot of times people start off sewing with just their presser foot down, and they wind up with this little wad of thread up here at the end. That's because the needle is trying to catch up to the feed dogs underneath. So that won't happen if you put your needle down into the fabric first. And when I stop, if I'm going to take a break, or I need to, say, reposition my fabric, like if you're adding on a border or binding and, something rather lengthy, I always, when I stop, my needle is down in my fabric. I make sure that. The fabric may turn, but you can always get it back exactly. Not necessarily true, just having it under the presser foot. It can still pull away, and then you've got that little zigzag in your fabric. Another thing that I do, again, this was a tip from my mother. I'm going to turn this around so you can see it. I'm going to start sewing. This is just 2 pieces of fabric. I'm just going to sew strips together. But anytime I'm making a seam, I do 2 things. First off, I start and I put a needle over here, away from my needle. That's just to help hold, because oftentimes you get started and this happens. So I always put a pin up here to hold what would be the left side of your pieces. The other thing I always do, I put my pins in at an angle toward my needle. And can you get that? All the way down there. The reason for that, and if you start doing it, you will see that it works. It makes a difference. How many times have you sewn a little bit and then all of a sudden you get this itty bitty tuck? That's because your top thread is not staying with, or your top fabric is not staying with your bottom fabric. Think about the principle of your sewing machine. The feed dogs are pulling this bottom fabric through at an even clip. Then you've got the presser foot, which is sitting up here on top. Well, theoretically, it's holding that right in place, but it also scoots it. It scoots it, and it can make little ripples, and it can make an uneven seam. But that doesn't happen nearly as much if you've got your pins in this way, encouraging that fabric to go toward the needle. Of course, a lot of people don't pin at all, but I'm telling you, for people that pin crossways, and they sew down, and the next thing you know, they've got this little bump of fabric. You can eliminate that in large part by putting your pins at an angle toward your needle. So, again, that's one thing a lot of people have seen me do and say, why do you do that? So that's why. Just a few general things now. Bobbins collect a tremendous amount of dust, and you should be very thorough in cleaning out your bobbin case every time you put a new bobbin in. Take the extra time, and I take it apart. I take the casing and everything out. I brush it good. I make sure that all that lint is out of there. If you do that, you'll wind up having a lot less issues associated with the bobbin by keeping that bobbin casing clean. And most all sewing machines have a manual that shows you exactly how to do it and exactly how to put it right back together again. So, and the other thing I always do, and again, this was a tip from a longtime quilter, change your needle, put a new needle in when you start a new project. If you've made a quilt with a needle, that needle needs to be retired. It should be done. It should be trashed. Get rid of it. And while you're getting rid of things, how many times have you pulled out a pin and it's bent? And you say, oh, I don't want that. So you stick it back here and you pull out another one. Why'd you do that? If you don't want that bent pin now, you're not going to want it tomorrow or next week or next month. So trash it. Pitch it. Get rid of it. You don't want a bunch of bent pins because they're not good for anything. Let's see. Oh, pinning intersections. And this I'm going to have to just use as an example. You wouldn't probably ever put these together like that, but, well, you might here. Okay. You want to, I wish I brought a better example. You want these two seams to match exactly. So you look at them and a lot of times they'll kind of nest together and you think, well, that's good. And because you've put a pin in right here and it's come out the other side right in the right place. So you pin it and then you stitch it and the seams don't match. Well, the seams don't match because that's not the way to pin it. You want to take a pin and pin straight through that intersection exactly where you want it to be. And I'm sorry, Pam, I should have done this with the print fabric, but anyway, okay. And push that pin all the way down through, just straight through. And you hold it there while you pin both to the left of it and to the right of it. Then you're going to wind up with seams or a point that match. Because what happens is if you put your pin in and then you flip it and turn it up, you've already scooted it. So use it by pinning straight down. And once you get used to it, it doesn't take but just a minute or two longer. And it really, you know, if you're picky like I am about my points matching, it really works. And let's see. Oh, my last tip, and I've started doing this and it really makes a big difference with me. Have you ever you had 30, 45 minutes to sew and you say, well, but by the time I get going, I won't have any time. I've started always leaving myself, when I stop, leaving my project at a point where all I have to do is sit down and sew. Because that's what I'm craving, and that's what I've got the 30 or 45 minutes or an hour to do. Because by the time you get up there and you start cutting or you start doing some complicated procedure or something, then you've lost that little bit of time. And I've found it's much more productive. Do that before I quit. And then when I come back to my sewing, I can do just that. I can sew. And it makes me a happier quilter. So, thank you. I hope you've picked up something that might help you. And if you haven't, then I want to hear your demo because I want to know all your secrets.
Thank you so much for all the tips. I'm sure it's going to be helpful to lots of people. Thanks, Karen.